Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New View podcast. My name is Mac.
And my name is Megan.
Come along with us as we dive into the world of competitive Irish dancing and beyond,
Sharing perspectives, developing community, and learning from each other.
We hope you enjoy.
We are super excited for Mac and I just to chat today and have a great conversation.
Yeah, hi, everyone. It's good to be back. I really enjoyed our last episode with Aiden and Megan. I thought they had a really awesome conversation and I enjoyed getting to watch it, but I'm excited to be back chatting as well now, too. So, yeah, today is just Megan and I. And we thought we would just keep this like really casual, just a fun, interesting little conversation. And we thought we'd kind of get into somewhat of a broad topic, but it's definitely one that's been a little bit more top of mind for me recently. And we thought we would just kind of talk about our own experiences and maybe ask each other some questions about it. And hopefully, you guys find it useful. So, what we wanted to chat a little bit about today is the idea of how sometimes, and maybe more often than not, we kind of paint ourselves into a pretty like strict identity, or we kind of put limiting beliefs on ourselves in terms of like what our role is in life or how we're able to show up or the things that we're capable of doing. So, for example, I think Megan and I can both relate to this at varying degrees at various points of our life. And I'm sure lots of you guys listening can relate to this too, in this, to this sense of like, sometimes you feel, maybe you have really big goals in dancing and you start to attach to the idea that I can only be a good dancer. And, I identify as a really good dancer, and that means I can't identify with being a really great student, or you just maybe limit yourself from possibilities that are maybe right there and totally available to you, but you just kind of get locked into this one idea of how you can show up. And I think that's probably common for a lot of elite performers and not just athletes, but in all areas of life. And I just think it's an interesting thing to start to recognize and maybe to start to question sometimes in yourself when you're maybe a little too locked into one thing, because it's possible you're maybe restricting yourself from, paths forward that you are totally available to you, but you might not think are there, right? So Megan, I'm just curious, have you experienced this, and in what ways have you experienced this? And yeah, how are you noticing it in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, that's a great question, but I think it kind of shows up for everyone in lots of different ways. I'm sure I could name like a million different examples right now, but just within the context of dance, I even for a long time have felt, you know, I've identified with I'm a slip jig dancer and not that I could be good at the reel or other dances. I see myself as, someone who has a lot of natural talent for the slip jigs. I really enjoy that. I identify with that and I have for years, which has been great in a lot of aspects in that it's helped me become very good at that one specific dance because I so identify with it. I have a certain level of confidence in all of that. But I'm sure anyone who's listening to this can also kind of hear the faults in that and saying, wait, like, yes, maybe I'm a really good slip jig dancer, but that doesn't automatically then mean I'm not good at anything else, right? And I think that's something a lot of dancers deal with in terms of saying, hey, maybe I really, really like this dance, or I really feel my best when I do this dance. But then in really identifying with whatever that dance is, they kind of lose that confidence and lose that sense of identity with other dances, And just in regards to competition, that's probably harmful in that if you're only feeling great about one dance, you've got to get up there and do at least three if you're in that championship level or more if you're in grades and all of that. But we can kind of see the fault in it when we say it out loud. It seems so true and real in our
Yeah.
heads, I think. And even for me, it seems like, yeah, why would I not identify as a slip jig dancer? But I'm sure in hearing this conversation, you're like, yeah, maybe that's true, but don't then negate all these other things and skills that you might have. And outside of dancing too, relate heavily to what you were saying as we started. Just, I identify so strongly as a dancer, and I love that about myself. And I love working really, really hard at it, dedicating my time to it. But there have been times in my life where, because I identify as a dancer, I then maybe lose my sense of self in other aspects of my life, like in my school and education and all of that. I maybe limit my potential because I identify as a good dancer and someone who works really hard in that area. And because I have created such an identity around that, maybe I've not allowed myself to access even my full potential in another domain, whether that's school or another sport or in being a really good sister or a daughter, any of those things. When you just kind of consider that, it shows up in a lot of areas of our lives. Do you kind of feel that, Mac?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have so many thoughts as you're chatting through that, and I agree with all of that. I think something that's really keeps coming up in my mind is the idea of like the concept of either or versus both and. I think for myself, I tend to be more of like a no person sometimes in the sense of like when potential like opportunities are presented to me, or the idea of adding more things into my life, my natural tendency, and sometimes I actually think this is a strength to an extent, like my natural tendency is to be like, no, I can't do that because I know what my priorities are, and I'm very clear on the fact that I don't want my other priorities to be compromised because I'm adding something else in. And like I said, I think at times that can be useful and that can be good to be really clear on those priorities and be able to say like no to certain things. I think we all know that as elite performers, like sometimes you do have to make sacrifices. But I think, like I said, that I tend to really lean that way. Whereas I think I definitely have other people in my life who tend to be the opposite, and they're more what I would describe as like a yes person. And it's like, yeah, let's try it. Yeah, let's try it. And that's cool that people are on like kind of different ends of the spectrum when it comes to like saying yes and no to different opportunities or roles or things as they present themselves in your life. Um, and I think that it's probably important that there's lots of different types of people in that regard that exist in the world. Because if we were all yes people, that might be problematic, and if we were all no people, that would be problematic too. But I kind of like the idea of the fact that like that can change within me at different points in time too. It doesn't have to be a static like trait or characteristic. Just the way that like the way you were relating it back to the idea of how you identify with certain dances is like, yes, I see yourself as a really great natural slip jig dancer, and that's great, but that doesn't have to be like a static, permanent trait in your life that you can never be good at the reel. Like, just because maybe you're more naturally inclined to express yourself through a slip jig and that works for you and your physique and whatever, that's great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like with a little bit of effort or a little bit of more of a different approach that you could, who knows, like maybe you would unlock a whole new level of reel dancing with a little bit of openness to that possibility, which I just think is kind of interesting. And the thing that more and more as I get older, I'm starting to just be in awe of is really how there's these interesting parallels and connections that we can make from seemingly unrelated things that can really be like bring a lot of added value. So, for example, okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about my own experience in this. So, in the past, I've been very like dialed in, locked into like, no, I have to, this is the only way I can execute a major dancing competition is by arriving 3 days ahead of time, having three sleeps, and only basically like getting up, watching dancing, doing my practice, and then going back to my hotel room. And like that's the only possible way of having a successful week at a dancing competition. But over time, I think I've been invited by other people in my life to like just explore not being quite so rigid with that. So, for example, like let's go to an art museum, let's go have an experience somewhere else, let's go see something. And it doesn't mean like, oh, I'm abandoning my preparation and my routine and not being like diligent and making sure I'm prepared in my dancing or whatever. But you just never know where you might find some inspiration that actually does relate back to your dancing, or you never know how getting a fresh outlook on something from being exposed to something else, then reinvigorates your dancing or like brings a new level of energy or creativity or helps you see something or helps you solve a problem in a way that you never might have thought that you would. So I kind of went on a total tangent there. But do you ever feel that yourself? Because I know like you're self-admittedly quite like rigid and in the past like you know pretty like this is the only way I can compete and this is the only way I can prepare. Like have you ex like what's your experience
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
exploring that?
Yeah. And I think all of what we said is amazing, but for any dancer that's listening, yeah, some level of preparation and rigidity in your routine and all of that is great. It's great to have those things and develop that because otherwise we're just kind of maybe a little too loose and not quite locked in. There is totally a place for that.
Like
Yet I think as you get older, and maybe younger dancers have experience with this too, but I'm sure lots of older dancers specifically kind of find themselves feeling locked in or like trapped in their specific routine or plan or vision of themselves or values, whatever that is, in a way that they then feel kind of limited or not fully themselves. And I know for me, yeah, I'm admittedly a very like rigid person, especially when it comes to competition and my preparation and my practice routine. I'm someone who likes to do it the same day in, day out, all of that. Not necessarily because that fulfills me, but because that has become my rigid routine and I need to do that to feel some level of pride in my work and confidence and all of that. But what I've realized even recently is that, yes, that's great to have some level of a routine and control over things. But really, what's most impactful once you have your routine down and all of that is to say, okay, I'm gonna, keep my warm-up plan, keep like my practice plan, but I'm gonna really push myself to say yes to maybe like an invitation to go do something with friends on a random night, or the opportunity to do a slightly different warm up should I want to, or even less of a warm up if I'm feeling like I don't need it. The plan can and should fluctuate, whether that's your entire life or your presence in dancing or just like your competition day plan. I think
hmm
that kind of, I would almost say bravery to try something new, even if it's teeny tiny, is worthwhile and kind of enhances your experience. And it's interesting because one of the ways to prevent like burnout in your daily routine that I've read in like a lot of business productivity kind of books, one of the best ways to do that is just to take a slightly different route on your way to work. And that's kind of like what we're getting after here in terms of um, your routine maybe or your life, the way you live your life and identity as a really good dancer might kind of be like that drive to work. It might be always the same, and that's great. And sometimes it just goes by and it's totally fine. But other times there are periods in which you feel really burnt out or you want to try something different. And it's as simple as, taking a left turn where you should have gone right, whether that's, having a slightly different practice or um, working out instead of practicing or whatever it is, allowing yourself just a little space to like experiment with something new and go from there. So I don't know, just as you're saying that came up um, as an important point for me that I wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really cool. And I think all of this like really ties in to, you know, like everything is connected sort of, right? I think it's like I think that's a really interesting point about just like how, yeah, like the routine and going the same way to work every day. That's like very familiar and like comfortable and safe. But there's also comfort in knowing that you can adapt to going a different direction. Like there's comfort in knowing you can still figure out how to get to work if there's a detour, right? Like let's say
Yeah.
there's construction and you've never ever taken a different way to work and now you have no choice but to take a different way to work. I think there's like comfort in knowing that you'd be able to navigate that anyways. And I think consciously choosing to do things differently every now and again, just for the sake of doing them differently, is a good way of exercising that muscle and that like ability to adapt and to handle whatever sort of situation arises. And I think also on the flip side of this, I think you and I both have already admitted we're more on the like rigid routine side of things. Like that's the way we would gravitate. And so for us, I guess challenging those like limiting beliefs about like how we are is more in the sense of like, oh yeah, challenge yourself to like go on a social outing or go to a museum or do something that's like outside of the routine. But I think it can also go the other way too. Like I think a lot of people would say that they're on the opposite end of the spectrum from us and they're like, I hate routine and I don't like following a plan and it like I know I need to do my practice and I know I need to do my training and I know I need to lock in, let's say for the next month or whatever, in order to prepare for this competition coming up, but they really like struggle to do that. And I think that sometimes like you can have the limiting beliefs in that sense as well as like, no, I'm just not the type of person that can follow a routine. I'm not the type of person that can be really diligent with my practice. And it's like, well, is that true or is that just a story that you're telling yourself that you're bought into? Like, is there some tr potential truth in an alternative to that? And it doesn't mean it has to be like a 180, like now you're the most rigid, rule-bound person ever. That doesn't have to mean that, but like, is there room in that narrative to shift somehow a little bit? Like, maybe I could be the type of person who builds like a little bit more of a routine and a plan into my life. I don't know, maybe. And that's going to look different for everybody, but that's kind of like the magic in all of it is like you get to write whatever story it is that you want. Um,
Hmm.
and it's just about getting past those seemingly very real and true and potentially permanent ideas we have about ourselves that we actually are the ones who have the power to shift how we see ourselves, like more than anyone else, which is kind of cool. Although that is hard.
Absolutely. I mean, those are all really great points. But to summarize, what would you say? Let's play both sides of it. If you were someone who's not very rigid, lacks a routine, maybe is trying to find some more definitive terms for themselves and who they are, whether that's as a dancer, an athlete, whatever it may be, what what maybe small steps would you take? And then on the flip side, maybe as you are now, a very kind of rigid person, more routine bound, what are some small things you do either on like a daily or kind of weekly basis to push yourself to, explore a little more and grow?
That's a really good question. And I wish that I had like a really super awesome answer, but I'm just going to give you the answer that I think is sounding like it would be useful in my mind at least. So, one thing is like even though you're trying to develop other areas of yourself that maybe are not as immediately present, like let's play the side of, okay, you're not a super routine, diligent preparation type of person, okay? What are your strengths then? Like, are you somebody that loves to be super social and interact with other people? Or are you really into like looking things up on the internet and you love doing like deep web dives or, um, whatever, maybe you love yourself a good podcast or whatever that might be. Like, how can you use the things that you're naturally tending towards as ways of building the other things? So, I don't know, let's say you're a super social person and you love to just like get out and be with people and you're super extroverted, and that sometimes seemingly takes away from your ability to like be diligent in your preparation. Okay, I could see how that would play out. Maybe you look at ways at getting creative of like, how could I kind of satisfy both of those needs? And like, maybe I schedule some practices, like 2 or 3 practices a week with my friends that I love hanging out with, and we're all at the studio together. Or like, we plan to do a workout together or whatever. So then it's kind of like, oh, I'm, you know, satisfying that like want for connection and socializing and all of that while also sort of actually building a habit and a routine with the practicing or whatever. That's just one example from like an infinite number of examples, right? Um, and then I also think a little bit of the flip side is necessary too. And it's getting honest with yourself of like, I don't know. My teachers have said this to me before. It's like, if you don't really know what to do at practice, maybe pick the thing that you want to do the least, because that might be the thing you need to do the most. Um, so for me, oftentimes like I struggled with timing as a younger dancer and rhythm. And so, if you ask me like what would be the funnest thing to do at practice, it's probably not just like dancing to the metronome. Didn't really, but so a little bit of asking yourself like, "Ooh, what do I like not want to do?" And that's maybe like the answer of what you should push yourself to do every now and again. Not all of the time to the sense of like now you hate doing it, but you never know. Like with my example with the metronome, that was off, if you'd asked me, okay, like what do you want to do at practice today? It absolutely, the answer when I was 18-year-old was not let me just dance to the metronome for 45 minutes. Like that doesn't sound fun at all to me. But in actually kind of going into that and going into the thing I didn't really want to do because I knew it was necessary, I actually developed a love for it. So that's one of those examples of like there's potential for something that you learn to love to do that maybe you weren't initially inclined to do that in the first place. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of like, how can you make it feel good and fun and natural to you, balanced with a little bit of like, oh, I gotta force myself a little bit and like pick, like consciously choose the thing that you don't really want to do. Is that?
Absolutely. And I think that that kind of growth that we're talking about to push who you are and who you believe you are and your identity and all of that, that is by nature pretty uncomfortable and a hard, really cool thing to do. But we'd be lying if we said it was super easy, right? But there are ways, like you said, to make it an enjoyable process. But there are also moments when you have to sit back and say, okay, I got to do my hard thing, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. I gotta do my hard thing. Yeah, I think that's a good one. Um, and I don't think there's like a set formula for like how many times a week you should do your hard thing and how many times a week you should play to your strengths or do the thing that's fun and natural or whatever. I don't think there's like a set formula for that. If there is, somebody please let me know. But I do think it's a little bit of like living and learning, right? And that's kind of cool. But I think just even having, for me, like in recent years, having the conversation of like, okay, what if? Like, what if you don't have to like only live one certain way? What if there is potential in all these different places that you're just not even acknowledging, right? Like you don't know until you try, which I think is kind of cool. And even just taking this one step further, a question that I have for you, Megan, is we often talk about seeing the silver lining in things or like seeing the positive or reframing or whatever that might be. Like, how do you think this conversation applies to those situations where, you know, from the outside, it clearly looks like, this is like not a great situation, but you want to sort of open yourself up to the possibilities within that situation. So I'll give an example so I can maybe make a little bit more sense. Like, you know, you dance the Oireachtas and you were going into it like so trying for and hoping for that world qualifier spot and you're one off. You're one off world qualifying. How do you get like a little bit radically positive or maybe like a little delusionally positive in a productive way in that type of situation.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because I mean, we've all been in situations like that, and it is hard what you're saying to be kind of radically positive in that and challenge yourself to not fall into that like, oh my gosh, this sucks kind of mindset because it does. Let's be real.
Yeah.
There are those
Yeah.
moments where it really is hard. But that's interesting. I think what you can do there is potentially say, okay, I'm gonna like really objectively assess what were some personal gains here. Maybe to world qualify, you practiced harder than you ever have before in terms of creating like an actual practice plan. And so through that, you developed a really nice level of confidence and belief in yourself because you did the work, you saw the improvements, then as such, you felt confident and performed like that.
Mhm.
That's a skill that'll take you through life, you know. Unfortunately, you didn't meet your exact end goal, but you can't then say, oh, that was a waste of my time because look at the growth you've just made in terms of developing those really incredible skills. That'll get you all the way through life, not just competing in dance, right? And there are other things too, I think, like, oh, maybe you got your best placement ever, but it just was still, one away from that world qualifier kind of position. That's still worth celebrating. And I think too, when we become so rigid with what we want to achieve in alignment with who we are, like, oh, I'm a really hardworking dancer, so I have to achieve something that aligns perfectly with who I see myself as. When those two things fail to connect, let's say, yes, you're a super hardworking, talented dancer, you've put a lot of work into it, but you don't meet your end goal here, so there's like a disconnect. Of course, that's uncomfortable and hard and disappointing, but that doesn't then make this whole side of you disappear. You don't automatically, lose those skills as a person. If anything, you've then strengthened them for the next time around or whatever the next
Yeah,
challenge may be.
totally. And sorry to like jump in, but you're reminding me of a song that I just am loving so much right now. It's called Middle of It by Lainey Wilson. And I think, you know, the whole idea behind that song for anybody who doesn't know it is like it's all about, those periods in your life when you feel like you're just in the middle of it. And, you're in the middle of maybe really, really working towards something and you're just struggling away and you just can't see how it's ever going to resolve or how you're going to achieve the thing you're working to achieve or, whatever it might be. I think everybody kind of can remember a time in their life where they felt like they were just in the middle of it. And
That's
one of
so
the
true.
lyrics, yeah, one of the lyrics is like, you're knee deep in the weeds and you can only see a little of it, like smack dab in the middle of it. And I love that because I love that lyric because it's like, I'm just trusting that I can't really necessarily see what the purpose of all of this is right now. My dad used to say this all the time to me and I'd roll my eyes, but he'd say like when I was having a rough time with something in dance or whatever, he'd always say like everything happens for a reason. And I'd be like, "Dad, like what? Like you're telling me like I didn't get this like I'm so disappointed in this placement I got or like this injury is happening to me for a reason. Like why? Like what do you mean this is happening to me for a reason?" And I look back now and I go, exactly what you said. It's like whether there was some really clear reason in the end why that thing happened and specific lesson I learned or whatever it was, no matter what, it was like practice being in the middle of it. And it was practice handling like adversity. And every single one of those times, like sometimes just going through adversity for the sake of going through adversity is worth it, whether
Hmm.
whether it leads to something specific or not. And I think like that narrative is always available to you. And I am not by any stretch saying like, you know, when really, really tough things are happening that they're not tough and like that you don't wish that they weren't happening. And like there's plenty of people in situations where like I don't want that to be happening to that person or whatever it is. But if nothing else, like that's always available to you to choose to see these hard things as like making you stronger and making you more capable of dealing with the other adversity that's bound to happen to you at some point in your life. And I don't know, I think it's a cool way of putting it in terms of just like it's always just practice for the next time you're in the middle of it, you know?
Hmm. Absolutely. So to kind of tie that together with what we're talking about and, having our conversation about today, I think challenging yourself to get a little uncomfortable when you maybe find yourself in a situation you're too comfortable in, or you're overly used to this routine, or you maybe just you're sick of it and you want to grow or challenge yourself a little bit, or maybe you're just looking for something to do. Get a little bit uncomfortable. Find like one thing you can do that week or that day, whether it's okay, I'm gonna like practice my hard thing that I always put off and I'm just gonna see how it goes. Like maybe this will be terrible, but I'm gonna see how it goes. Or maybe I'm gonna try something entirely new and get extremely uncomfortable, whatever it is. Just giving it that tiny bit of a try either prepares you for next time around and gives you some confidence that you can handle discomfort and just evolving as a person, or you're just left with, okay, like I can handle this, right? It's
Yeah,
an
or
experience that's worthwhile.
totally. Or it surprises you and like maybe that leads to meeting some really cool person that's going to help you with your goal. Or maybe that leads to a really interesting conversation that you have some really awesome insight in that you didn't have before. Or, you it points you in the direction of, oh, that's an area that I could really use some strength developing in that, and I didn't know that before. Like that's where I think it's so cool. Like there's these infinite number of like possibilities in every te step that we like take forward in our lives. And, oftentimes those ones that are like a little bit uncomfortable are like the most promising ones in terms of where they're going to lead us. So I don't know. I think it's cool. I hope people could follow that conversation. It was a little bit all over the place, but I think it's a cool conversation. And yeah, if people have thoughts on it, I'm curious to hear what others think about all of this. And yeah, I think this was a
Absolutely. Be
cool
sure
talk.
to let us know like what getting uncomfortable means for you and that kind of growth, and maybe who you see yourself as and who you want to become. And it's great because now we can all work on it together.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Here's to writing our own narratives. Thanks for joining us in this episode of the New View podcast. We hope you enjoyed.
If you have any ideas about future guests we should interview or want to connect, you can find us on Instagram at newview.collective or email us at newviewcollective.mm@gmail.com.